How would you like to be able to jump up to back wheel on an obstacle? That's actually the move that helped me decide when to turn pro. Welcome to the Shred Spot. My name is Aaron, and this is where we film all of our trials tutorials, and today we're talking about exactly that, jumping up to back wheel. This is like the iconic trials move that you always see everybody going for, jumping up at some huge obstacle, landing on their back wheel, and then moving on to the next thing. I'm gonna go through all the basics to get you rolling on this, and there are a few different ways to approach it. Now, going back to the first statement I made about becoming a pro by landing this move, the specific requirement I had for myself was if I could jump up to back wheel on the top of a picnic table, that's how I was gonna magically know that I should be a pro rider and I was gonna change my ranking and start competing on that level. And I did exactly that. Now the funny part about that story is that once I was able to jump up to back wheel on a picnic table, it actually was like the most useless thing to have when it came to pro level competition. It was more of like a confidence booster for me and my riding, but it actually never came in handy during pro competition. So take that for what you will. You can probably visualize what it looks like to have a rider on their back wheel on top of a feature, but really the most important part is the takeoff to get to that point. And of course the landing after that. And that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna break this down into some smaller pieces that will help you learn the process easier. What's unique about this movement is that there are 3 totally different ways to do it, and it all depends on how much run up and what kind of situation you find yourself in right before you jump up to back wheel. So if you have a ton of space, you could do this move with a bunny hop. If you have a little bit less space, but still some room to move around, you could 3-pedal up to back wheel. And if you're standing still and there's no room to move, you could pedal kick this movement. Now, depending on those 3 factors, it's gonna depend on how much control you actually have doing this movement. So a bunny hop, you're probably going to be able to go the highest, but you'll have the least control. Pedal kick is kind of a mix between the two. You're gonna be able to go high, but you're gonna have a lot more control. And then pedal kick, you won't be able to go as high, but you'll have the maximum amount of control. All that's to say, you don't need to be able to do a pedal kick and a 3-pedal and a bunny hop to be able to do this movement. You can start where you are. So if you're the most comfortable bunny hopping, start with that movement. If you're the most comfortable pedal kicking, we'll start with there. There are a lot of tutorials on this channel and others that will give you the basics and foundation for there. I'm gonna try to give you a little bit for each one, and then you can decide which way is the right way to go for you. Really, it's about which one you feel the most comfortable in the run-up, and then the landing is all kind of the same for this movement, no matter what you've done to get there. Before we get too deep into the movements we're gonna be making to make this technique happen, let's first talk about what we're gonna be jumping onto. Now, I normally recommend a curb or something small to start this, and that still stands if you've got that easily accessible. But 2 other things to consider. First of all, make sure that whatever you're jumping onto has a long landing. So you're not gonna land on back wheel first try, and every try after that, you're definitely gonna drop your front wheel a few times. So make sure the stakes are low on this one. Don't be jumping up onto something where your front wheel could drop and you could flip over the bars if you don't do it perfect the first time. Save that until much later in your progression. Start slow. But another way, even if you don't have a curb, is to find a crack on the ground or a line of some sort where you can jump to. So you're almost thinking about doing it as like a small gap where you're taking off somewhere and landing your back wheel on this line. That's gonna help you as far as targeting where your back wheel lands. It's not gonna be so much the height element, but it will help you with your timing on the takeoff. One of the main reasons I recommend jumping to a line or a curb that has some width to it is that you're not only worried about jumping high, but you want to make sure that you're jumping straight forward so that you can stick your landing with your back wheel. A lot of times when people are first learning this move, they'll kind of lean to the right or to the left as they're jumping to something. And so if you're on a very narrow feature, you could miss it or be off to the side or be off balance or whatever. So a wider obstacle will also make a big difference in terms of perfecting your aim by jumping up to the back wheel. I'm gonna come back to the different methods of taking off and that whole process of taking off, because I think what's really the most important about jumping up to back wheel is just understanding and visualizing what's gonna happen and all the elements that go into it. So we've picked out the obstacle, we've talked about why we wanna have something that's a bit wider so that we can kind of go from one side to another and perfect our aim when it comes up to jumping on back wheel. The next thing I want you to think about is your bike position on the landing of the thing. So what you really want to do, a lot of people think about jumping up on top of a feature so their back wheel lands on top of it, but what you need to do is actually land on the front of your tire, and you're going to land with your front wheel pretty high, And your momentum from doing this movement is gonna naturally drop your front wheel for you. So the momentum of this movement helps complete the movement. You don't have to do all the work yourself. You just have to worry about getting that back wheel up on top of it. And because your wheels are large enough, you can hit it kind of on the front of the wheel and let it go down. In fact, you're jumping maybe like 2 or 3 inches lower than the actual feature itself and letting the wheel do the work, which helps you kind of eke out some higher heights when you're really going for it. But think about that process of when you land. You don't necessarily need to land on top of the feature. You need to land on like the corner and the face of the feature and let your bike do the rest of the work for you. That's also gonna help you kind of grip the landing that you're on. If you jump on top of something and it's a slick landing or you're coming into it a little bit too hot, you can slip out or slide. It's not as pleasant. You want to use that landing to kind of hold your bike in place as you get onto it. The other thing that we're thinking about on landing, other than grabbing the brake, which is of course necessary jumping up to back wheel, is what your body is doing, your body position on the bike. And when I jump up to back wheel, I like to think about having my arms and my knees very wide on the bike, have them bent. And like I talked about before in a previous video, using your body almost as a suspension. So if my knees are bent and my elbows are bent, I can pull the bike up into my body to get just a little bit extra height as I'm going up to back wheel. Another reason why I've bent my knees and I'm now sinking to the back of the bike is to kind of anchor the rear wheel in place. So my body weight is off the back of the bike. That's helping keep the front wheel up, and it's gonna help me reset to do whatever else I wanna do from the back wheel. If I wanna pedal kick to the next gap, or I wanna do any other pivot or anything else, I'm anchored in place there by kind of putting my weight on the back of the bike. Another thing that you can do to kind of hone this skill is actually when you jump off of stuff, jump to your back wheel, because it's the exact same process of landing on the back wheel and kind of compressing your body down, anchoring it on that back wheel. So you could jump off a curb and try to hold it on the back wheel, which is maybe a totally different skill that we'll talk about in greater detail later. But if you want to start trying and playing with it, jump off a curb and try to stay on your back wheel. It's the exact same movement with what your bike and body are doing to keep your front wheel in the air while lowering your body down over the back wheel. Let's also talk about brake control. Now, obviously if you're jumping up to your back wheel, you want to grab that back brake as soon as your back wheel touches the feature, and you want to hold onto it until your body has fully reset. So you're going to hold onto it longer than you probably normally would, but just keep it in place so that your body can do what it needs to do. That back wheel is really gonna hold the bike in position so that you can first compress and anchor yourself on the back wheel and then make that next movement. Don't let go. I wanna also talk about a few basics on your bike that will make this move easier, safer, better, all those things. The first thing that I would say is tire pressure. Super important because you're jumping up to a 90-degree corner in most cases. You probably want to have just a little bit more air pressure than you would if you were riding really hardcore natural terrain or whatever. So on my mod bike, I usually run like 20 PSI, and my street bike, I normally run like 40. You probably want to pump it up just a little bit extra. You don't want to be hitting rim every single time you jump up to back wheel. That's not going to end well for you. Put just a little bit extra in here. You don't need to pump it up crazy, because when you do land, you want your tire to kind of form around that edge, but you also don't want to be hitting rim, because this is like perfect for snake bites. You're landing on a sharp corner with all your weight and all your momentum. It can go sideways really quick if you don't have enough air in that back tire. Make sure obviously that your brakes are working quite well. This is like especially the back brake on here. If your brakes aren't dialed, pretty dangerous to jump up to back wheel for obvious reasons. And a lot of times if you're way behind the bike when you're doing that, even the best brakes, they're not going to be perfect for you. So you want to be in control of the bike. You want to be over the bike as you're jumping up with great brakes. One other important thing on the brakes too, what I like to do is have just one finger on the brakes, and I like to have my hands as wide as possible. And this is one of those moves where it's really helpful for that to happen, because you actually have your hands out that wide. It's giving you the most balance while you're up on the back wheel and giving you the most leverage out of your brakes. So your brakes are working really well, but your arms are also as wide as they can be. Your hands are wide on the bars. It's giving you the most possible balance when you're in this position. The last point I want to make on this is if you're struggling to get that front wheel up, your bar and stem combo can make a pretty substantial difference. If you have a higher rise bar, it makes that front wheel pop up a little bit easier. And if you have your bike set up in like a really crazy trials, like forward handlebar setup, you might consider just rolling it back to give yourself a little bit easier way to pull up on the front wheel. Up until this point, we've been talking a lot about the landing, of how you land on this stuff, because I think this is really the most important part. There are tutorials on this channel and others about the various ways of bunny hopping, three pedaling, pedaling up onto features. But I've really focused on the landing because I think that's the most important. That's what makes this trick happen. And I want you to understand and be able to visualize that stuff before we talk about how you run up on features. So now that we've done that, we've put that in place, let's go back to the beginning and talk about your takeoff for this process. Now at this point, we've talked about how to get up onto features, and hopefully you can ride 2 tires onto a feature at this point before you attempt jumping up onto one. One of the things that I like to talk about when it comes to riding onto features when I'm just pedaling up onto them is I start the movement the same distance as the height of the thing. So if it's a 1 foot feature, I start 1 foot out. If it's a 2 foot feature, I start 2 feet out. When I think about jumping up to back wheel, I need more time to get my bike lifted off the ground and to put it in place. So I go 1.5 times the height. So if it's a 2 foot, I'm jumping 3 feet away to get up onto it. And I just need that little extra time to get the bike up into where it needs to be, because we're not just riding onto something, we're jumping in the air and floating to the landing. So we've talked about the actual takeoff and how to measure that whole distance. Then let's go back to the different ways that you can do it. There's the bunny hop method, which is arguably the easiest one to do. If you're confident bunny hopping onto stuff or over stuff, this will be the easiest one for you to learn. It's not the most controlled way to do it, but you can at least get that first win in the bag. So think about bunny hopping up and landing exactly how you should. Now, definitely focus on the landing. Think about all the things that we talked about in the landing, and it's easy to forget all that stuff as you're bunny hopping up onto something, because I feel like a lot of your bunny hop muscle memory will kick in. But really focus on having your knees wide, your arms wide, and really sinking down into that back wheel. And start small, just start on a curb. Next, we're gonna talk about the 3 pedal to rear wheel. There are actually tutorials on this channel for the 3 pedal gap and the 3 pedal riding up onto something. It's essentially the exact same thing, just make it real explosive on that last pedal, and that'll give you the momentum to jump up to back wheel. And the last one is the pedal kick gap. Same thing, you just pedal kick gap, you're just aiming a little bit higher. And where I started on that curb, just go a little bit higher and a little bit higher. You're gonna have to work yourself up to higher and higher features when it comes to pedal kicking specifically. You're not gonna have the same momentum that you'd have on a 3 pedal or bunny hop, but you're gonna have so much more control as you get locked in with pedal kicks in general. If you can get a pedal kick going, you can pedal kick gap to something, that's a huge step for you moving forward. So much trial stuff is that micro adjustment and being able to jump from point to point, and the pedal kick is the best thing to have in your back pocket. Here's one thing that has always plagued me as a rider: overhang features. So something you're trying to get up onto that has a ledge and then it's empty underneath it, it drives me crazy. And I guess all I want to say is that it's okay to be afraid of stuff like that, because it's terrifying to think, what if my wheel goes underneath this or whatever? What I try to do when I jump up onto features like that, I try to visualize in my brain that there is something on the front of it, because it doesn't really matter. You're not going to hit it with your back wheel. It's not going to actually do anything different when you do the move. It's just something that messes with your brain while you're trying to jump onto it. Try not to think about it. Try to visualize that it actually is covered up, and that will help you substantially. One additional thing I want to talk about is bailing on this move. There's actually a really clever way to do it, and it's this move called the abubica, where you jump backwards off of a feature. It's maybe the most stylish way to not make a trick. Don't hesitate to bail if you don't have it just right. If you're off the back a little bit too far, or you're a little bit too low on it, it's okay to jump off the back of the bike. And that's exactly what you want to do. You want to jump backwards and put your feet down behind you when you get off this thing. Don't try to push your weight forward, because sometimes you can fall to the side, left or right, and be caught under the bike, which is not pleasant. Make sure you're jumping off the back of the bike if you need to bail. I've talked a lot about the approach to the obstacle. If you're struggling with either one, check out the pedal kick tutorial here and learn the 3 pedal gap. That'll help you the most. Thanks again to my crew on Twitch. Today was just an epic stream with all the homies. You guys are the best. Thank you for all your insight and advice. I think it's making these tutorials awesome. So if you haven't joined us on Twitch, definitely come in. The crew here is epic.